Trying to keep up with Psycho Pass has been a rather precarious adventure for fans of the franchise. I don't mean that like some shows have ungodly episode lengths, or others that have spin-offs up the wazoo that are still required watching because of how they relate to the franchise's canon. No, Psycho Pass has been hard to follow because in many ways it's taken to the Kingdom Hearts school of continuity. After spending time indulging in one major film and then a series of 3 more films, they figured that the best way to bring an audience back is just to slap a 3 on it and call it a day. Problem being that since many of those additional films never made it to North America, we fans over here are having a doozy of a time making sure that we got our bases covered before walking into this 3rd season. Thankfully for us, despite the rather intricate plot in Psycho Pass from a contextual standpoint, it's still quite easy to get into, if you know what you're doing. This video was brought to you by NordVPN. Use the link in the description, nordvpn.com/glassreflection, to get 70% off a 3-year plan. This video was also made possible by viewers like you via our Patreon campaign. To both our sponsor and our patrons who are watching, thank you. So normally I avoid asking the direct question about if a sequel to any anime is worth watching, because generally I'd like to think that if you liked the original season, or in this case seasons, then you can answer that question all on your own and you don't need me to help you out with that. However, because, as I mentioned, the addition of both the feature film that we did get, simply titled Psycho Pass the Movie, and the series of 3 films called Sinners of the System, which we didn't get, I'll take a guess that the more common question to be asked going into this is, do I need to watch those in order to watch Season 3? No, you don't. In fact, both myself and some others would also make the argument that really all you need going into this is to have seen the original Season 1. That's it. Of course, this being a first reaction and all, for all we know that might change as the season progresses. Psycho Pass Season 3 is a bit of a soft reboot while also trying to continue the mainline story. I call it a soft reboot not because it 100% assumes that you've never watched Psycho Pass before, but because most of what is familiar about the world is gone. The series still expects you to know what a psychopath is, what the Sybil system does, and the general job of both the Public Safety Bureau's inspectors and their enforcers. However, no longer are we following the perspective of the previous franchise protagonist, Akane. In fact, it's now been 8 years since the start of Season 1, and this season we are shown in Episode 1 that Akane is in some kind of jail. The series declines to elaborate as to why, instead jumping headfirst into our 2 new lead inspectors. So I'll take a gander and assume that any reasoning around that will be a major plot point going forward. First, we have Kay, a man who comes off through appearances as extremely straight-laced, no-nonsense, and until you actually get a feel for his personality, you might imagine him to get extremely angry at the lax attitude of his partner. In fact, if you were judging by appearances, all he's missing is a set of glasses to be a carbon cutout of Gino from Season 1. But Gino eventually softened up through Akane's meddling over time, and thankfully, the K model comes with the attitude adjustment built in. He's still the more serious of the 2, but he relies on his partner for quite a bit and trusts him to get the job done, regardless of his more obscure methods. Harata is the one I'm having a harder time pinning down, mostly because of the addition of his supernatural powers? Up until this point, it is not odd to see things that could be explained by some kind of pseudoscience. It's a futuristic world, and there are plenty of things that don't have real-world equivalents. But at least though most of that, you could see how science could explain it, even if it can't at the moment. Arata has the power to see the past, sort of. He calls himself a mentalist and says that he is able to cross the mental boundaries and use empathy on his targets. But if I was to tilt my head in a quizzical manner at anything that didn't make much sense in this series, this would be what I started with. In practice so far, his powers make it very easy for him to visualize a crime scene, to almost replay events in his head. Useful, since both he and Kay treat their jobs more like classic detectives than futuristic detectives. As per most of the franchise's plot lines thus far, Psycho-Pass seems to be looking at the same story, but from another interesting angle. The faults and potential issues of the Sybil system have been clearly outlined in seasons past, but now a bunch of new interesting things have been added to the mix. People are once again able to escape detection of the Sybil system to commit atrocities. Foreigners are starting to take the stage front and center, and the organization tasked with keeping latent criminals in check has gone through a hell of a shakeup. Not only is the Bureau's star inspector now in jail, but former hot-headed rookie Mika has, since the events of Season 2, got bumped up to the Bureau's chief. This new season starts us off with far more questions than answers, but as that is its job, it's not all that surprising. In fact, I think it's something that's quite promising. Season 1 of Psycho-Pass introduced us to the world and tackled the notion of social control and the positive benefits and disadvantages of it. Season 2 disappointed many by pretty much taking the exact same themes, but not building on them in any new or interesting way. Season 3 is shaping up to do things quite a bit differently. Not just with its new cast, but also covering more of the world. The introduction of foreigners to this new Japan, for example, in an accepted manner, like our new friend Kay, will hopefully lead to some interesting situations, unlike when the Americans showed up illegally in the first film. But it can go beyond that as well. We are already seeing references to financial issues, what effects that isolationist policies are having on this pseudo-utopia, and even a possible housing bubble that might burst and affect new immigrants. I was a bit skeptical at first when I heard about the technical changes to the show's runtime. The series is only expected to have 8 episodes, but each episode is about 45 minutes in length. Overall, it'll be shorter than a 24-episode series of standard length, but this has far more interesting implications on how the narrative of each episode is told, with over double the runtime per episode. Great thing about it is that it doesn't feel all that much longer. No episode so far has felt like a slog or a chore to get through, even with the 45-minute runtime. Every episode just sails by, unabated with ease. I wish I could say the same about the streaming service, though, that it is available on for us in North America. I have made my issues with Amazon Prime's streaming player clear in the past, so I'm not going to bore you with a repetition, but ultimately I'm far more incensed about the situation because I don't think it would have been a problem in the first place. Sure, historically, some of Amazon's properties have made their way over to Sentai for dubbing, and given Sentai's relative closeness to Funimation in world, down in Texas, there is a chance that they could get a dub out without many, if any, recasts. But this is all one big situation where the stars need to align, and I'm not getting my hopes up for it. But if you've made it this far into the video and are still questioning if this series is worth your time, barring any horrible left turns that the narrative might take in its final episodes, I'm voting heavily on the yes. My biggest problem with the second season of Psycho-Pass was that while the writing was mostly good and the production values were typically high, it still just felt like more of the same, like a bridge between the show's introduction and its future without really going anywhere or doing anything interesting. Now, however, this new season has asked some very interesting and very serious questions about the fabric of the world, so to speak, and the answers to those questions, or how the narrative might go about dodging those questions, is something that looks to make this new season a contender for best of season. And I don't put that label out there lightly. Of course, I tend to be biased towards sci-fi anime, especially one produced by Production IG. But even still, there's plenty about this season, this show, that has piqued my interest. And since really, I'd say you really need to only have season 1 to get into it, you might as well give it a shot. So that's it from me. There will be a streaming link to go and watch Psycho-Pass 3 in the description below over on Amazon, as well as a link from this video's sponsor, NordVPN. The digital future is a scary and unforgiving place, but unlike the pseudo-utopia of Psycho-Pass, you can do your best to protect yourself and what you do online. NordVPN offers a private encryption service with unlimited bandwidth restrictions to keep your data coming to you safely. They do not log what you do, and they make it so that no one else, from your service provider to Google, can do it either. Now, some streaming services, Crunchyroll in particular, have begun to recognize and block users from using VPNs, but for general use elsewhere on the web, having a VPN is becoming more and more of a necessity. When traveling, for example, or even connecting to the internet at your local coffee shop, having the ability to connect to public networks without worrying about what happens with your data along the way is a godsend. So for a limited time, if you click on the URL in the description, nordvpn.com/glassreflection, and use the code glassreflection, you will get 70% off a 3-year plan, and you'll also get 4 months free. But don't worry if you find that a VPN just isn't for you, because you can cancel within the first 30 days and get your money back with no questions asked. And thank you very much to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. And that was our last proper FR for this season here in 2019. We have one last video coming up very soon, very shortly, about some other shows of the season. But that'll have to wait until next time. Until then, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.